Welcome back to another session of Catechism Corner at King of Kings. We continue to make our way through the commandments. Today we will be on the sixth commandment. As I have invited in the past, questions or comments, would love to hear them in the comment sections on the various platforms that we publish this on. It is always helpful to like and share the video if it has been edifying to you. Today we talk about the sixth commandment, and this is one that there is no shortage of things that we could talk about. And in fact, we could probably have multiple videos on the topic of sexual sin, what is all involved in that as our world continues to seem to be going down more and more depravity in this area. But let's look at the Catechism, and we'll unpack some different areas and talk about some of the things that we might be observing in our own society and challenges within our own lives. The sixth commandment: you shall not commit adultery. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we lead a sexual, pure, and decent life in what we say and do, and husband and wife love and honor each other. At the foundation of this commandment is all the way back to the garden and how God ordered his creation. He created one man and one woman, Adam and Eve. He establishes the relationship of marriage between them, in which he calls them to be fruitful and multiply in that relationship. And so, at the foundation of the sixth commandment is the topic of marriage. Marriage, as I said, was established by God. We see that in Genesis. We see that in Matthew 19 and corresponding Gospels, in which it is reaffirmed that how it was created in the beginning is how it is to be still today. One man and one woman in the context of marriage, and that is where the sexual life is ordered and pleasing to God. The purpose of sex within marriage is not simply children, but that is one of the main blessings. So oftentimes in our world today, children are, yes, seen as a blessing, but we know if you are a parent, you know the burden of raising children, and that's more a consequence of sin than how it was naturally ordered. Children are truly a blessing. We want to have children. We want to be fruitful and multiply as God has called us to, but always in the context of marriage. But sex is not only for reproduction, it is also to bond husband and wife, bring them together. They are to find delight in one another. And this is good, and this is God-pleasing. In the book of 1 Corinthians, it talks about this relationship and how if a husband and wife are not to deny one another those sexual activity, they are not to use it as a weapon in their marriage, but rather they are to be together and find delight in one another. It prescribes times of fasting in this area of life, but so that one does not succumb to other temptations, they are to return to one another. And so marriage also is a place to help individuals fight against temptation. God has wired us in a way that we have sexual desires, and we are to find a fulfillment in those desires in the context of marriage. So oftentimes in our society, sex has become something simply for pleasure, for between people, and we have divorced children and the sexual relationship from one another because of our own medical advancements in which we have discovered on how to manipulate the body in order to stop the childbearing process. And so, for much of history, this was the natural consequence of sexual relationships were to have children. And yet now we have circumvented that, and we've kind of divorced these two things from each other. We'll have our kids when we want to, rather than when the Lord gives them to us. So just something to keep in mind. This marriage relationship is intended and called to be a lifelong relationship between one man and one woman. And this is how God has ordered it. But we know that Jesus addresses the topic of divorce in the Gospels. He says, because of the hardness of heart, Moses gave allowances for divorce. And Jesus says the only way for one to divorce and be remarried is in the context of when the other commits adultery. That is the only place where that is to be found. Paul also goes into another reason, and that is abandonment. And oftentimes the church will also talk about abuse in this context as a form of malicious abandonment. And so those are typically the areas that we talk about when the conversation of divorce is had. It's dealing with adultery, it's dealing with abandonment, it's dealing with abuse. And now the goal in all of these contexts would be for there to be forgiveness and restoration. The immediate answer isn't divorce, but rather seeking to figure out how to bring forgiveness, bring the grace of God into those circumstances. Yet, unfortunately, sometimes that is not able to restore that relationship of marriage. And we lament that. We are not ever happy to see the reality of divorce. Too often times, I think there is the conversation around the topic of divorce of finding the way in which it can be done in a type of thing. That is never the intention. In fact, God says that He hates divorce. It is not good. It is not how God has ordered things. And so we keep that in mind. So the sixth commandment really addressing the topic of marriage in that relationship between one man and one woman. But it also is addressing the topic of sexual purity in where other sexual sins are referred to, not simply adultery, which is the context of marriage, one or both of the individuals having sexual relationship with somebody other than their spouse. But it's broader than that as well. It covers all forms of sexual sin. And so just because two individuals are not married to anyone does not give them the right or the permission to have sexual relationships with one another simply because it's not quote unquote adultery. There's other names for it, there's other descriptions for it in the scriptures, and it's clearly outside the will of God. And so there's a whole host of sins that would fall under this umbrella. The ones that we probably know of would be premarital fornication, but then we would also talk about homosexual relationships and how those are counter to the will of God. But those are not the only sins, sexual sins, that the scriptures talk about. There are sins of pedophilia. There's sins of rape. There's sins of bestiality. Those are some of the sins that are acted out, the actual actions that are counter to the will of God. But we know that Jesus also speaks not only about the external actions that are counter to the will of God. We know that he talks about in Matthew 5, verses 27 and 28. You have heard it said that you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that if you look upon a woman with lust in your heart, you are already guilty of adultery before God in heaven. So these lusting looks, these lusting feelings that we have towards other people, those are also being spoken against here in the sixth commandment. And one of the biggest areas that this comes into play in the life of, in our current day and age, is yes, of course, simply looking at other people around us, um, but the access that we have to material that is either borderline pornographic or full-blown pornographic, in which it draws us in through our lust and is used in ways that are counter to how we are called to use to see other people. We are not to use other people for our own gratification. We are not to use other people for our own satisfaction. This is counter to love. This is this is not loving at all. So our call to love God and to love our neighbor, this is the opposite of that. Sexual sin is always using somebody for your own use. It's using them, and pornography is this as well. In the description or somewhere in the comments, I'm going to link a paper that I have written on the topic of pornography, and it probably needs some updating. It's an older paper that I've written, but this sin is so pervasive in our society. Um, it goes into the history of pornography, and pornography used to be something on the outskirts of society. You had to risk embarrassment of going into a store that sold it, or risk embarrassment of going to the section of the video store that contained this material. But with the technological advances that we have seen in our world, pornography is accessible to us in every turn. Yes, we can simply turn on the TV and there's things that are borderline pornographic or even fully blown pornography. But our phones, our computers give us endless access to sexual deviant material, in which is using people for our own gratification in some capacity. And I'd invite you to look at that if pornography is something that you struggle with. Um, what used to be kind of a male only issue has now really become a full blown male female of all stripes issue. The statistics are showing this, and the statistics are staggering when you look at these types of things. And so I'd invite you to take a look at that paper, um, and would love to hear any feedback that you have on that. But I want to talk about another area that doesn't oftentimes get talked about when we're talking about the sixth commandment. Oftentimes, the sixth commandment is things that we should avoid, things that we want to not do. We want to not look at pornography. We want to not have sex outside the relationship of marriage. But what's so challenging when you are talking about sexual sin is that it is a much more of a personal sin than many of the other sins that we talk about. When we lie, it's kind of out away from us. When we steal something, it's dealing with an object. Yes, it hurts our neighbor, but it's dealing with an object. But as soon as you enter into the conversation of sexual sin, it becomes very personal because our bodies are involved. And in fact, um, 1 Corinthians also addresses this in chapter 6 when it talks about how the sexual sins involving our body carry with it a different dynamic. And so oftentimes those who have struggle with sexual sin carry with them an immense amount of shame. And shame is not simply something like guilt. It's related, but they are distinctly different. There is a sense of uncleanliness. There is a sense of outcastness when we are dealing with the topic of sexual sin. And it is even more so in the context of when sexual sin happens to you. What we need to understand is the statistics show the amount of people who are abused as children is absolutely staggering. That sexual sins happen to children in so many different places, by different people. And when these things happen to us, or perhaps would refer to somebody who has been raped. These things are not the person's sins that they have committed, but rather they are something that happens to them. But the nature of this violation against them brings with it a sense of shame. It brings with this sense of, I am now unclean in so many ways. And I want to take a moment just to talk about what Jesus does and says in different places in the gospel. The example that I want to look at is from Mark chapter 1. And a leper, it was considered to be someone who had to stay away, somebody who was unclean, somebody who couldn't be a part of the community because they were dirty and people wanted to keep them away so that they didn't affect them in some capacity. And in Mark 1, verse 40, a leper came to Jesus, imploring him, kneeling before him, and said to him, "If you will," he says, "if you will, you can make me clean." He goes to Jesus and says, "If you will, I know you can make me clean." And in that society, to be next to somebody who was unclean, to touch somebody who was unclean, was unthinkable, specifically for a religious person, a religious leader. Jesus is not revolted by uncleanliness. Jesus is not reviled by uncleanliness. And in fact, those who are unclean is exactly who Jesus came for. His response in Mark 1:41 is simply, "I will be clean." So I want to encourage you, if you are dealing with the shame of the uncleanliness that comes along with sexual sin, either sins that you have partaken in or sins that have happened to you, you have a Savior who says you are clean. You are clean, and you are welcome to be close to Jesus. This sin does not keep you away from Jesus. Jesus spoke and hung out with the prostitutes, and he offered them forgiveness. Jesus comes to those who have been violated in unthinkable ways and says, "You belong to me. This sin that has happened to you, I take it upon myself, and you no longer have to carry it." Yes, there are oftentimes many things that we have to work through, but the word of Jesus is true. He says, "You are clean." He makes you clean. And so as we ponder this commandment, as we think about this sixth commandment, "You shall not commit adultery," we want to value marriage. We want to celebrate marriage. We want to encourage marriage for those who are going to enter into that relationship, to be fruitful, to multiply, to bond with their spouse in this very special way. And we want to encourage everybody to look to Jesus, for no sins that we have committed make us unforgivable, uncleansable. We can find our forgiveness in Jesus because he has come for you. So continue to ponder this, continue to put guardrails up in your own life to steer away from sexual immorality. It's not easy in 2026. It is a very difficult thing to do. But our call as Christian people is to avoid this sexual sin and to glorify God with our bodies. May God continue to bless you as you walk through the Catechism, continuing to study, and may you always look to Jesus, your Lord and Savior.